Hello, my name is Dr. Walker, and I'm the horn professor here at the University of New Mexico. And here is going to be a masterclass on the Albuquerque Youth Symphony audition music. So the first one we're going to be talking about today is Tchaikovsky Symphony Number 5. So the first thing to know about this excerpt is that it's one of my all-time favorite excerpts to play, and it's just the most beautiful solo in the symphony. So if you've never heard the whole symphony, I encourage you to go do that as soon as possible. Just listen to as many recordings of this as you can. And the thing to remember is that this is one of our most beautiful solos, and most people who don't know anything about the horn will probably recognize this melody. So the sound, the quality of sound that you have is one of the most important things to focus on when you're preparing this excerpt. So I think it's smart to just maybe take the first few notes and experiment with how good you can get your sound. And you can feel about making it really warm air coming out, making sure there's a lot of space in your oral cavity. And then once you feel like you have the sound, make sure you keep that sound for the rest of this excerpt. The next tip that I have for you is that 12/8 is kind of a tricky meter. And so what it means is that every dotted quarter note is going to have 3/8 notes that belong to it. So what you want to do is make sure that you play this excerpt with that subdivision in mind. So before you start worrying about all the ties and everything else, just play the music like this. And so what that allows you to do is to see how long every note is in terms of an eighth note subdivision. So when you go back to playing it without articulating every note, which you wouldn't want to do in your audition, you'll be able to hear that subdivision going on in your head, and so it'll make it really in time, which is always one of the goals that we have when we're preparing excerpts. So the next thing to talk about is articulations are really important in this one. And if you notice, there's just a ton of things written. And so it's Tchaikovsky trying to be as clear as possible about how expressive this can be. And so even at the beginning of the movement, it actually says in Italian, with artistic license. So you can really be as expressive as possible and really make it sing as if there were words like an opera singer was singing it. And so every note is a different part of the word that really needs to be understood. So even the first bar, there's the slur, and then there's the tenuto. We actually need to hear that the tenuto as a really gentle articulation. So it should sound. And so I'm trying to make the tenutos really smooth, and the accent isn't so much of an aggressive tongue accent, but really a weighted accent. We don't want a really heavy for that A. We need a nice weighted accent. And so whenever you see later on in the piece the sostenutos, that means really sustained and slower in another tempo, and really articulate with those. So when you listen to the complete performance of me playing this, pay close attention to how I'm articulating everything and see if you can try to imitate that. And so it's a lot of really detailed stuff, but it's really something that would set your audition apart. All right, so the next piece of advice I have for you on this excerpt is going to be one after A. There are these two large leaps in the piece, and our goal is to make them as smooth as possible. So I'm talking about bar after A, so the E to the F sharp, and then the next bar, the D down to the E. Now I find that to make that as smooth as possible, I like to practice it going backwards. So I'll start with the F sharp, and then I'll play up to the E. And when you're doing it the first few times, it's okay to hit all the notes in between, and we're going to use kind of the overtone series to get us through those intervals. So we want to think about just putting your second valve down and slurring up, and then at the last second put your thumb down to play the E. So it'll sound something like this. And just you can move your valves really slow and experiment with how you can just get your air to go from one note to the next. And so once you get a sense of that and how that feels, then you can see if you can play it a couple times and just getting it really smooth. And just taking a breath between each time, again, going back to playing with your most beautiful sound. All these things will really help. And once you feel like you've kind of worked it out, going backwards at least, then go forwards. And that will really help smooth out that interval for you. You can articulate it to practice it, but I find that usually just learning those backwards is really helpful for me. And then when I approach it, I'm thinking about how can I find the commonality between those two notes in terms of what it feels like to play it. So how can I think about where that F sharp is in my embouchure before I even get to the E? So that I'm thinking ahead, I'm thinking, okay, the F sharp kind of feels like this placement. So all I have to do is make sure that when I'm approaching the E, I can easily access that. And then that's how I get really smooth legato on those two lines. So the next thing you're going to hear is a complete performance of this etude. So I hope some of these tips were helpful. It's just kind of a few things to help you practice. Please do not be afraid to send me an email with any more questions, or if you'd like to set up a Skype lesson, we can definitely do that. So stay home and stay safe, and good luck on your auditions.